Glad you made it, but who's mate? Aren't you stoked for the making of a who's made it, but the maid for who made the name for the men married to the maiden? Last to the first love. Glad you made it, but who's mate? Aren't you stoked for the making of a who's made it, but the maid for who made the name for the men married to the maiden? Last to the first love, who's true for the Madison, who wants to square? To the garden, but even though it was needed out for no longer for the use she came. Short like a short list, contorted for the well proportion for the court, adoptions, options, and operations inherited to the aggravated, alleviated for the eyes be dilated, enough for the heart to be considered and amputated, for the invisible, for the treasure box and treasures her chest, box and the chastisement, dehydrated for the baptism, rapture with no limits and the captures was till the rising in the realms of your day for the after yesterday's gestures. Unless your bank investors invested in destroying the future for the testicles and testifying the birth of the day that the earth stood, for the dirt, for the dung, for the mud, for the least evident for the Holy Spirit from the ground, dug, set aside for the die, for the life, for the sacrifice, who sacrificed for the cry sacred, the fear for the forefathers, for the robbing, busted gender for the pronouncing robber, or pronouncing like a pronouncement for the canalized for the crowd to be aroused. You could be arrogant, negligent, tangent and indigent, not yet the room for the A. Woman like a beginning of the alphabet, not an alpha yet. Outer seems to split the betas for the summer supreme. Supermarket sweet was leaving. Wet, lazy, prayer. You superheroes when you get with your action figure sets. Death for the wet. While you slept in the county to the reaction of sheep. It's the internet that was caught by the nature of restricting the living. No matter for the depth of the deprivation you depressed. Recession recently. Recess with the Stevie T.
Glad you made it, but who's made it? Aren't you stoked for the making of the who's made it, but the maid for who made the name for the marriage to the maiden? Last to the first love, who's truth for the Madison, who wants to swear? Root to the garden, but even though we will be the God, no longer for the evil she came. Short enough to short miss, contorted for the well proportion for the court, adoptions, options, and operations inherited to the aggravated, alleviated for the eyes were dilated, enough for the heart to be considered and amputated, for the treasure box and treasures her chest, box and the chastisement, dehydrated for the baptism. Rapture for no limits and the captures will still be there rising in the mornings of your day for the after yesterday's gestures. Unless your bank investors invested in destroying the future for the testicles to testify in the birth of the day that the earth stood, for the dirt, for the dung, for the mud, for the least evident for the Holy Spirit from the ground, dug, set aside for the die, for the life, for the sacrifice, who sacrificed for the cry sacred, the fear for the forefathers, for the robbing, busted gender for the pronouncing robber, or pronounces it on the like a pronouncement for the canalized of the crowd to be aroused. You could be arrogant, negligent. Tangent and indigent, not yet the room for the A. Woman like a beginning of the alphabet, not an alpha yet. Albertsons to split the betas for the summer supreme. Supermarket sweep was weeping. We wept. We lazies. We prayer. We superheroes with the biblical action figure sets. Death for the wept. While you slept in the county to the reaction of sheep and just the internet that was caught by the inmates who restricted the debated no matter nor do they. For the depth of the deprivation you depressed. Recession recently. Recess the receiving to investing in ventures. This is the adding up to the add-on to the additions and dictions of jurists and jurisdictions for the juries and dicks who describe the dictionaries anyway for the adding of you to be the directing position for this to be dictated for the described to be affirmed to be raised in the pharmaceuticals and it was assured suitable enough to be the dressed up addressing to the denounced denoted by the domination for the dominant shot domain dormant or the doormat should be adoration or adoration for the heart that was adorable to that deplorable enough for the worst the reputable repudiated surprised and suppressed succeeding for the leading leadership to sink and even though for the even the thinking that even the leaks of like your life for the litigations and the lies spies for the spies and spectators specifically specified for the crusading crucified with the crusty lies and the rest of them the restrooms to shit off your chest like fake breasts meat eating but too much to chuck to admit to the men and the need for the mid rocky and antonyms free from the anomalies free from the breath of even the heaven while waiting to exhale free from the free willy free for the dental care and free for the wonky willy that willy you want to run the circumstances for the circumcised circulated for the circular system and circulated for the accusations and accused aggravated for enough for the sexual GMO no aggro made it for the making of an okay cozy middle earth and find a middle ground for the middle east midterms and midnight for the mid-air from miss.
Glad you made it, but who's mate? Aren't you stoked? Glad you made it, but who's mate? Aren't you? Glad you made it, but who's mate? Aren't you? Glad you made it, but who's mate? Aren't you?
Glad you made it, but who's mate? Aren't you stoked for the making of a who's made it, but the maid for who made the name for the men married to the maiden? Last to the first love, who's truth for the Madison, who wants to square? Root to the garden, for even though evils be it out for no longer for the evil she came. Short enough to short miss, contorted for the well proportioned for the port, adoptions, adoptions, options, and operations imperative to the aggravated. Alleviated for the eyes was dilated, enough for the heart to be considered, and amputated for the alleviation, the pain for the treasure box and treasures her chest. Box in the chastisement. Dehydrated for the baptism. Rapture for no limits, and the captures will still be the rising of the mornings of your day for the after yesterday's gestures. Unless your bank investors invested in destroying the future for the testicles to testify in the birth of the day that the earth stood with the dirty, with the done, for the mud, for the least and evident, for that the Holy Spirit from the ground dug, set aside for the die, for the life, for the sacrifice, who sacrificed for the cries sacred, the fear for the forefathers, for the robbing, was the gender for the pronounced and robber, or pronounces lack of announcements for the tantalized for the crowd to be aroused. You could be arrogant, negligent, tangent and indigence for not yet the womb for the A. Woman like a beginning of the alphabet, not an alpha yet. Albertsons to split the betas for the summer supreme. Supermarket sweep was weeping. We wept, we lazy, we prayer. We superheroes for the biblical action figures set. Death for the wept. While you slept from the counting to the matching the sheep. And this is the internet that was caught by the inmates who restricted the mating. No matter no new rating. For the depth, for the deprivation, the depressed. Recession recently. Recess the receiving to invest in the adventures. This is the adding up to the add-on to the additions and dictions of jurists and jurisdictions for the juries and dicks who describe the dictionaries anyway for the additive. You can be the direct position for this to be dictator for the described to be a firm.
Happily now, I'm an asshole.
Glad you made it, but who's made it? Aren't you stoked for the making of the who's made it? With the made for who made the name for the marriage to the mating. Last to the first to love, who's truth for the Madison, who wants to swear. Root to the God of it, even though it was beaten out, but no longer for the evil she came. Short enough the short miss, contorted for the well proportioned for the port. Adoption, adoptions, options, and operations imperative to the aggravated. Alleviated for the eyes was dilated, enough for the heart to be considered, and amputated for the alleviation, the pain for the treasure box and treasures her chest. Box in the chastisement. Dehydrated for the baptism. Rapture for no limits, and the captures will still be the rising of the mornings of your day for the after yesterday's gestures. Unless your bank investors invested in destroying the future for the testicles to testify in the birth of the day that the earth stood with the dirt, with the done, for the mud, for the least and evident, for the Holy Spirit from the ground dug, set aside for the die, for the life, for the sacrifice, who sacrificed for the cries sacred, fear for the forefathers, for the robbing, was the gender for the pronounced and robber, or pronounces lack of announcements for the tantalized for the crowd to be aroused. You could be arrogant, negligent, tangent and indigence for not yet the womb for the A. Woman like a beginning of the alphabet, not an alpha yet. Albertsons to split the betas for the summer supreme. Supermarket sweep was weeping. We wept, we lazies, we prayer. We superheroes for the biblical action figures set. Death for the wept. While you slept from the counting to the matching the sheep. And this is the internet that was caught by the inmates who restricted the mating. No matter no new rating. For the depth, for the deprivation, the depressed. Recession recently. Recess the receiving to invest in the adventures. This is the adding up to the add-on to the additions and dictions of jurists and jurisdictions for the juries and dicks who describe the dictionaries anyway for the additive. You can be the direct position for this to be dictator for the described to be a farm, to be raised in the pharmaceuticals and it was assured suitable enough to be the dressed up addressing to the denounced, denoted by the domination for the dominant shot, domain, dormant, or the doormat.
Happily now,
Glad you made it, but who's made it? Glad you made it, but who's made it? Glad you made it, but who's made it? Aren't you stoked for the making of the who's made it? With the made for who made the name for the marriage to the mating. Last to the first to love, who's. Glad you made it, but who's made it? Aren't you stoked for the making of the who's. Glad you made it, but who's made it? Glad you made it, but who's made it? Aren't you stoked for the making of the who's made it? With the made for who made the name for the marriage to the mating. Last to the first to love, who's truth for the Madison, who wants to swear. Root to the God of it, even though it was beaten out, but no longer for the evil she came. Short enough the short miss, contorted for the well proportioned for the port. Adoption, adoptions, options, and operations imperative to the aggravated. Alleviated for the eyes was dilated, enough for the heart to be considered, and amputated for the alleviation, the pain for the treasure box and treasures her chest. Box in the chastisement, dehydrated for the baptism, rapture for no limits, and the captures will still be the rising of the mornings of your day for the after yesterday's gestures. Unless your bank investors invested in destroying the future for the testicles to testify the birth of the day that the earth stood, for the dirt, for the dung, for the mud, for the least and evident, for the Holy Spirit from the ground dug, set aside for the die, for the life, for the sacrifice, and sacrifice for the cry sacred, the fear for the forefathers, for the rotting, rust is dinner for the pronounced and Robert, or pronounces and dinner like a pronouncement for the canalized for the crowd to be aroused. It could be arrogant negative, tangent and indigent, but not yet the room for the A. Woman like a beginning of the alphabet, not an alpha yet. Our receipts to split the betas for the summer supreme. Supermarket sweepers weeping, we wept, we lasers, we prayer. We superheroes with the biblical action figure set. Death for the wept. While you slept in the counter to the reaction of sheep and listed the internet that was caught by the inmates who restricted the bidding. No matter no rating for the debt for the deprivation you depressed. Recession recently, recess the receiving to invest in adventures. This is the adding up to the add-on to the additions and dictions of jurists and jurisdictions for the juries and dicks who describe the dictionaries anyway for the additive. You can be the direct aid position for this to be dictated, for the described to be a farm, to be raised in the pharmaceuticals and living assured, suitable enough to be the dress of the dressing to be renounced, denoted by the domination for the dominant shot, domain, dormant, or the doorman should be adoration, or adoration for the heart that was adorable, to that deplorable enough for the rest of reputable, regulated, surprised and suppressed, succeeded for the leading leadership to sink and even know for the even the thinking that even the leaking leaks of like your life for the litigations and the lies, spies for the spies and spectators, specifically specified for the crusading, crucified with the crusty lies and the rest of them in the restrooms and shit off your chest like fake breasts, meat eating but too much to chuck, to admit to the bending with the need for the mid-rottney and antonyms and free from the anomalies, free from the breath of even the heaven or waiting to exhale, free from the free willy, free for the dental care and free for the wonky willy that willy you want to run the circumstances with the circumcised, circulated for the circular system is circulating, circulated for the accusations and accused, aggravated enough for the sex with GMO, no aggravated for the making of an okay equation, middle earth and find a middle ground for the Middle East, midterms and midnight for the midnight from this, middleman for the mid, regenerate, renaissance, rancid acts and can repeat, repeatedly to a wall denied for that the man's cries and matters of maniacs, who survived that archives, who could be the arch rivals, arrived at no arrogant array for the Aryans, who don't act for the color for the crayons, or who bottled up the good eons of the irons of the iron, who's the enemy for the men of men, who's the enemy of those across.
And so, we're supposed to go.